to pick up on that?
A little bit. There was one, a classic place which repeats the little Bruno saying on the WikiLeaks side. There was one stuff from Chris Patton. That was a bit elderly, but there was stuff from Chris Patton where he came up with 10 ways to solve the EU, and he also came up with some quite interesting points on the internal workings of the Commission and so on and so forth. How does the Guardian headline it? Putin had weird eyes, or wolf-like eyes. And that was the only thing they mentioned. They didn't mention all the serious stuff. It was just that it made some comments about Putin's eyes were killer eyes. That was it. And that was how it was covered. And this is the Guardian, that is the UK host of the wiki. I don't think, and the best comment I've heard about the whole WikiLeaks thing was written by Edward Conway in his blog, the Telegraph blog, where he likened it to WikiLeaks is a little bit like Amsterdam was in 1640. The only place where you could say something publicly, where everybody from the rest of Europe went to because there were no print restrictions in Amsterdam. And it was a very interesting piece. I would advise people to go and have a look at it if they're interested in the whole WikiLeaks phenomenon. It's an extremely interesting, I thought, very valid point. I don't think WikiLeaks is going to make much difference. It is a great chunk of information. I suspect the only difference is going to be is when Ambassador Blue wants to make some rude comment about Angela Merkel's ankles, he'll do it by telephone rather than by email. Look, but that's about it.
Very, very quickly, did either of you want to?
Yeah, certainly.
I've got it very quickly.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, just very quickly, and I actually, I wrote this before knowing I was going to be sat next to Sonny on the panel here. If you look at how the left-wing blogs in the UK have covered WikiLeaks, pretty much all of them have said either nothing or have said that genuinely the leaks would be a bad thing. And those encompass Left Foot Forward, Labour List, Political Scrapbook, Labour Uncut, and Next Left. The only largest left-wing blog which has actually had a proper ideological debate about the pros and cons of WikiLeaks is actually Liberal Conspiracy. So in a certain way, if you look at the way that's been dealt with in the big UK blogs, you see the big UK blogs behaving like the kind of Jack Straw line, if you like. This is nothing very important, or it's not immensely significant in a certain way. So in a certain way, and I think someone said that earlier on, is kind of, are some of the larger UK political blogs resembling the mainstream media outlets? Is Left Foot Forward becoming more like the New Statesman, only without a publishing arm? I think we're kind of, those things are growing together in sort of both directions, I would say. And there's always going to be, with WikiLeaks or whatever, the option of, do you feel yourself as a kind of an insider or an outsider, and how do you kind of draw that line? And I think for a lot of us who are involved in kind of web politics in some way or another, we've had to ask ourselves a lot of complicated questions as a result of WikiLeaks. It's kind of, which sort of side do we favour? It's the same as with My Society and Fix My Street and those kind of things. You've got those people who think if you release enough information and you hack enough, and you've got some kind of e-functionalism in a certain way, you can solve lots of problems in society that way, versus those of the establishment and the established order. And things like WikiLeaks kind of throw those cards up and they come down in a slightly different way.
Just quickly, with regard to network journalism, what's interesting to me is that a lot of people now come to me and say, by the way, we've got a great video of, well, not a great video, but a video of the police beating someone at a protest, or this happened or that happened, and then they know that because Liberal Conspiracy is read fairly widely, then that hopefully the mainstream media will pick up on it, and because we have regular contact with lots of our readers and stuff like that, they trust us and they say, please send this out, put this out there, this is very important. And The Guardian actually, since all these cuts have started and all these protests have started, they now become much more better at having one or two journalists which specifically go out there to speak to protesters and say what's going on. So the UK Uncut law actually gave the exclusive to The Guardian of who they were going to target on what day and all the rest of it, because there is now, people are much more savvy about saying, well, why don't we, as a protest group, give our exclusive to The Guardian about where we're going to protest, and that sort of journalism isn't really talked about much, but there is much more of a sort of a discussion going on between these kind of people who 6 months ago were just doing nothing, were just regularly studying, and now so savvy to say, let's make these videos and then give it to the blogs in the hope that it then gets circulated around everywhere. On WikiLeaks, we did a story. I was out of the country then. There was a very controversial story about the legal implications around Julian Assange's allegations, and this story went completely viral, and we had like 700 retweets on it within 2 days, and like 40,000 readers. from all over the world. And there was another near identical story run by Gizmodo asking the same questions about why the Swedish government had not released information about why Julian Assange was being targeted. And literally the next day, the Swedish government released a statement in English saying that this is what we're pursuing him for. Now, it could just be the regular order of things, but a lot of people said there was so much interest around the blogosphere about what he was being targeted for that forced the Swedish hand to say this is what's going on. So I think that there is a lot of interest being paid on blogs, and a lot of people, these days Liberal Conspiracy is not just a blog. I mean, in the sense that we get a ton of our readers from Facebook, Twitter, and Reddit. I mean, it's actually incredible how many people now post stories that we publish onto other social networking sites, and we try and make that process easier, because it's like a whole, it's not even like a one blog, it's like part of a much broader ecosystem, and I think it's important to sort of get your head around that.
Okay, any more questions? Yes, at the back.
I just want to come back. Bruno mentioned our common humanity, and Sunny mentioned migration earlier. And it's been said that as the national boundaries in Europe come down, the racial and religious boundaries are going up. And looking at the minaret ban in Switzerland and the niqabs being banned and things like that, case of Roma. And organisations like STOP, Islamization of Europe, are networked across Europe, started in Copenhagen. There's a Nazi site, Gates of Vienna. There's all sorts of stuff. Do you think that the blogosphere is looking sort of not necessarily at national boundaries, but at those sorts of trends and making a positive contribution as to how we can work together, as you suggested, Bruno, I think?
Well, I'm somewhat talking too much here, but what I will say is that, yeah, we do. I mean, we watch all the Gates of Vienna people, the Stop Islamization of Europe people, and I think that the response for the left-wing blogosphere is to try and figure out how do you frame a response, not just intellectually, but I mean, we have been on protests, or we have organised protests against radical Islamists as well as with the EDL, to try and say there is a growing movement to try and give voice to the people, moderate liberals, which I sometimes feel they don't speak out enough against either side. So, and there are discussions also. So I get invited now to discussions about saying how do we mobilize people across different networks to try and deal with the growing radical sort of right as well as left, across Europe. I mean, I think it's early days. I mean, I don't know if you've seen this fantastic New York Times article a couple of years back, and this guy called Charles Johnson, who used to run a blog called, or still does, called Little Green Footballs, and how he had a massive fight on the right in the US with people like Pamela Geller and Jihad Watch. Basically, these were the people who started off the whole sort of anti-9/11, anti-Muslim thing, and then they got into a massive fight with each other as well. So all I'm saying is, it's still early days. There is a lot of fights that broke out in the US blogosphere against, over the whole issue of counter-terrorism, and there have been fights in the UK too, between the left, the pro-war left and the non-war left, etc., etc. So I think it's too early to say right now what the response will be.
Did you
just a very small response to that is the web can give a voice to groups which just in no way had a public voice before, for good and for bad. Yeah? So the day that Change.gov launched in the United States, for example, 15 of the top 50 suggestions to the Obama administration for the legalization of cannabis, the day that Change.gov launched, is that a good thing, or is someone gaming the system? Well, essentially the web gives more groups, for good or bad, that opportunity. And therefore, if you're on the opposing side of that, you've got to be equally active to counter it. But probably more of those discussions are just happening in public now than they would have been 10 years ago.